The new Ryan Reynolds film If just hit cinemas. This film follows a young girl called Bee who is struggling because her mum died, and it's shown in a really sad montage at the beginning that reminds me very much of the start of Up. It's very, very sad, and it now looks like her dad might also suffer the same fate as he is in hospital. So she begins to see ifs, which stand for imaginary friends. And these imaginary friends are all around us but can't be seen by humans. They can only be seen by the original owner, and when the owner grows up and forgets their imaginary friend, the if can never be seen again. And so since Bee is having a hard time, she begins seeing ifs all around her and tries helping others to begin seeing their ifs. But then the ending changes everything. Spoilers ahead. So once the dad is revealed to be better, after Bee has said a really emotional monologue about how she can't survive without him and doesn't want another parent gone from her life, suddenly all the ifs then disappear. She then has to reimagine and believe again, and then all of her ifs return in the final scene. But did they? Were the ifs actually there at the end? Do they actually exist? Or is this entire film all just a dream and just in Bee's head? Kind of like some sort of coping mechanism. Because there is a lot of things pointing to the fact that this entire movie might just be a dream, and considering we're dealing with imaginary things, it wouldn't be too hard to believe if this entire film is actually imaginary as well. But first, what suggests that the ifs are real and that this isn't imaginary and that this is actually happening in the world of this film? Well, we have the fact that at the end of the film, it is implied that everyone who had forgotten their ifs begin to see them again, such as the grandma at the very end who speaks directly to her if in passing about dancing, or Blue's person who sees Blue once he's had the courage to go to his work meeting, and because of that he begins to remember Blue. And the montage at the end shows a few people from across the film all beginning to see their ifs. But is this just in Bee's imagination and her actually imagining what would happen rather than what actually happens? As it could very easily be a nice ending for the film, which I think it is, but I don't think it is actually happening. So with that out of the way, what do we have going against ifs being actually real and just a figment of Bee's imagination? Well, quite a lot. The biggest being Cal's room at the very top of the flat block where Bee's grandma lives. When Bee first moves into her grandma's flat, it's straight after her dad has went into hospital, where she begins to worry and thinks about her childhood a lot more when she had both of her parents. Then suddenly, while she's sad, she ends up finding the room upstairs where she sees the ifs and Cal. Now this room sort of becomes Bee's safe space while she's worried about her dad. In fact, everything outside of the room and around it seems very much scary, such as the old woman who lives in the flat next door. However, all of this changes at the end, where once Bee's dad comes out of hospital, she returns back to the room to find that it never actually existed. That instead of it being a room where Cal lives with all of the ifs, it is just an attic full of lots of items that can represent each of the ifs that we see throughout this film. And the old woman is now seen as a nice, non-scary old woman. And so since this room was full of random things and created a safe space for Bee when she was worried, it could be suggested that she came to this room and was inspired by all of the different items that she saw and created an imaginary story of imaginary friends from the items in the room, just like her dad told her to create her own story to cope with the fact that he's in hospital. She clearly went to this room, saw all these things, was inspired by them, and created a story of imaginary friends from that. And very soon this imaginary story took over her mind every time she entered the room, and since outside of the room was reality with her dad being ill, that meant anything outside of the room was scary, like the old woman, even if that wasn't true in real life. And then we have the people who Bee interacts with starts changing once she has built up this fantasy. She gets closer to her grandma by playing music from her grandma's time, and she creates an imaginary friend who can dance along with her grandma, inspired by her grandma's vinyl that she saw before, but it's not actually real. And then we have the other child who's in the hospital who can't seem to see any imaginary friends, and B is so confused by this because the boy is, for starters, younger than her and is in a very scary situation like B, so therefore she thinks he would have imaginary friends, further suggesting that this is all in B's imagination as a coping mechanism. And then finally we come to Ryan Reynolds' character Cal. Now Cal is probably the biggest piece of evidence that all of this is just in B's head, because as we learn at the end, Cal isn't actually real. He is B's imaginary friend who is a clown. However, throughout the film, Cal is the one who gets B to stop being scared, even though he's not real. And it just so happens Cal only starts appearing once B is reminded of her memory box of her childhood, which is of course where she drew Cal as a clown when she was younger. We already established that the other imaginary friends are inspired by the attic room and B's need for a safe space during this hard time. Now the childhood box that her grandma has where the drawing of Cal is the symbol and metaphor of B's safe space, a representation of the time when she had both a healthy mum and dad and didn't need to start worrying. And so it would make logical sense that once she had seen the memory box and then started imagining this world inside of her head, that it would be Cal, who represents her perfect time in her life, to be the one guarding and looking after all of the new ifs she's creating during this hard time that she's now in, because Cal represents that time in her life when she didn't have to worry. And all of this makes sense because B asks Cal, how long have you been able to see ifs, and Cal says for as long as he can remember, and that's because B created him at the same time as all of these new ifs, and because no one else can see these ifs, it suggests to me that this is all just B's way of coping and that none of this is real, because as soon as her dad is better and the safe space in reality returns, her need for a safe space in the attic and the memory box is no more, and so it does disappear, like at the end of the film. I think the ending with the ifs being reunited is just B's way of being able to say goodbye to her fantasy and grow up instead, and that she can believe everyone got their happy ending because she did. And so that's why I think this whole film is actually imaginary, and I think that adds to the message and the metaphor of the film so much more. And so I do think all of this film did just happen in B's head as a way of her to be able to cope with this hard time that she's going through. And it's interesting that as soon as she's finished with the hard time, suddenly this fantasy goes away. But anyway guys, that's the end of this video. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, make sure that you smash that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Guys, let me know down below in the comments, what do you think about this? Do you agree with me? Do you reckon that this entire film takes place in B's mind, or do you reckon the ifs do actually exist in this world? Let me know all your thoughts down there, and as always, we've been here at Gated Theories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Baby, all I really want